If you want to understand how Australia's security story changed this year, start at dawn off the western coast. The sea is flat, the horizon calm, the sky a thin line of pink, until steel rises out of the light like a plot twist. Chinese hulls, not fishermen, not freighters, warships, and not just passing through, they're circling. Live fire drills crack the air out in international waters. It's legal, it's routine, if you live in a Tom Clancy novel. But this is real life, and the message is as subtle as a foghorn. We can come this far, stay this long, and practice this loudly. What are you going to do about it? Welcome to Military Hub. Today we're breaking down exactly why China sent a task group to make a full lap around Australia, what that flex actually means, and how Canberra is responding. Beyond the press releases and polite frowns, we'll look at the hardware, the politics, and the uncomfortable math about who has what, where, and how fast it can get there. We'll even talk football, kind of, because in the South Pacific, winning the game isn't just about bigger muscles. It's about winning hearts, minds, and the stadium naming rights. Picture 3 Chinese warships sliding out of the Indonesian archipelago and down into the Southern Ocean. The task group doesn't hug the coastline like tourists. It roams, methodically, around a continent-sized island that has spent decades assuming distance is a defense. Then, for several weeks, it lingers in and around Australia's maritime zones and keeps steaming, eventually disappearing east toward the Tasman. There, the flotilla stops for live fire drills in international waters between Australia and New Zealand. Shots echo, tongues wag, and one humble commercial pilot becomes a national tipster because even in the age of satellites and sensors, sometimes it's a guy on a headset who says, you seeing this? Legally, nothing here breaks the rules. The seas are open, the drills are theirs to do as long as they respect the lines. But strategically, this isn't a routine cruise, it's a show, a message, a rehearsal. China wants everyone to notice 2 things. First, that its navy can operate this far from home for weeks, and second, that it can do it as a team, a task group, coordinated and confident. That's blue water behavior. That's not coastal defense. That's a navy that expects to shape events across an ocean, not just guard the harbor gates. You don't circle a continent by accident. You circle it to draw a line. Call it the debutante ball for the plan's next chapter. A circumnavigation of Australia marks a new level of confidence and endurance. One voyage doesn't rewrite the balance of power, but it proves capability, like an athlete who finishes a marathon not to win medals, but to say, "My lungs can do this." Blue water navies are expensive to build and even harder to sustain. You need logistics, escorts, replenishment, command and control that doesn't crumble when you lose phone signal. You need crews that can fight after week 3, not just take selfies on day 1. What Beijing just showed the region is that its navy can thread those needles, keep cohesion, and still have enough fuel, ammo, and discipline left over to conduct live fire drills on the far side of the map. More importantly, a task group isn't just ships. It's a mobile tool kit, air defenses for the fleet, anti-ship punch to keep others honest, sensors to map electromagnetic signatures, helicopters to hunt subs. If you're Australia, that toolkit at your doorstep isn't just a postcard, it's market research. It tells you what Beijing wants you to see and what it can hide while you're watching. The first thing you heard from Canberra was not panic. The Royal Australian Navy didn't run to the microphone shouting, "Surprise!" The line was measured. They'd tracked the ships through the approaches. They were monitoring. There were no unsafe interactions at sea. Translation: the bridge stayed cool. But that cool is the product of long, anxious homework. Australia treats this kind of appearance like a fire drill. You don't want to do it, but you're very glad you practiced. Behind the poker face, the playbook sharpened fast. Surface combatants shadowed and kept eyes on. Submarine hunting exercises picked up tempo. On the destroyers, crews checked what ready really means when a foreign task group decides to go loud just a few hundred nautical miles from your coastline. Ask any commanding officer. Readiness is not a speech. It's pure logistics married to discipline. It's the fuel in the tanks, the spare parts already on board, the vertical launch cells unlocked with the correct software, and a crew that can do the same drill for the 19th time and still take it seriously. "We'll get around to it" is not a plan you want to test when somebody else is already at periscope depth. Does any of this mean Australia was caught off guard? Not in the way critics hope for, but it absolutely means the country has to accelerate from "we'll be fine" to "show me the extra missile reloads, the spare radar modules, and where the next destroyer is coming from." Because in the Indo-Pacific, the calendar moves faster than procurement. Let's talk numbers without getting lost in spreadsheets. China's fleet is big and getting bigger. Its shipyards output hulls the way Australia outputs surfers. The plan has mass on the water, in the air, and in the missile magazines. Australia has quality in key places, excellent sailors, strong alliances, and a submarine plan that, on paper, turns the map into a minefield for any adversary. But here's the rub. On paper doesn't deter a ship that's already drawing lines off your coast. Deterrence is about what you can do tonight, not what you'll commission in 2033. At the sharp end, that means airframes and hulls you can surge today. It means anti-ship missiles that reach far enough to make a task group sweat. It means an air force that can keep fighters in the air in waves, not drips. Critics point out, sometimes with glee, that Australia doesn't have enough aircraft or enough ships to go toe-to-toe in a stand-up fight with a peer navy operating at scale. They're not wrong, but they're also missing the second half of the story. Australia doesn't need to beat China at China's game. It needs to complicate it so badly that any operation against Australia or in Australia's neighborhood becomes a slow, expensive, politically toxic slog. That is the logic behind the upgrades rolling through the fleet. Destroyers getting long-range land attack and new anti-ship strike options, frigates stacked with modern sensors, P-8s and helicopters primed for sub-hunting, the drumbeat of deeper magazines, better networking, and crews that treat training like religion. If you can threaten the fleet from distance, blind it at key moments, and make every approach a bad idea, you don't need to win the giant set-piece battle. You just need the other guy to dread the opening move. This wasn't a gap-year cruise for sailors with passports to stamp. It was rehearsal under the cameras, not just gunnery practice, but data collection, mapping sonar conditions, charting electromagnetic noise, watching how Australian assets posture and respond. Every time a navy shows up, it learns. Every time it learns, the next time gets easier. And that's the part that keeps planners in Canberra awake, the repetition. Because the most dangerous thing isn't a surprise, it's a routine. There's also theater. Power works on perceptions. A task group that circumnavigates your continent tells your voters we're vulnerable, tells your allies don't drift, and tells your government don't underfund me again. It's coercion without crossing the line into conflict. Beijing can insist it's a peaceful rise and that the drills are normal. And strictly speaking, none of that is a lie, but it's also not the whole story. Naval diplomacy is saying one thing with your mouth while your deck guns do shadow puppets behind you. If you want to see how influence really spreads, jump 2,000 miles northeast from Australia to island nations so small you can drive across them faster than you can pronounce their names. Here, China's not just showing up with ships, it's showing up with money, government buildings, sports complexes, roads and ports, gifts, loans, and friendship projects that turn the map into a scrapbook of gratitude. It's not all sinister. Sometimes a school is just a school, but debt has gravity. And when your GDP is smaller than some hedge funds' Christmas bonuses, a loan on big city terms can tie you to a patron for a generation. That's why Australia has shifted from "we'll get to it" to writing checks of its own, sending patrol boats, training police, and, yes, playing rugby as foreign policy. Soft power isn't soft when it keeps a strategic harbor friendly. In the islands, coaches can do what cruisers can't, make the next generation look west instead of north. Ask Beijing and you'll hear a version of this. China is rising, peacefully. It wants prosperity, stability, and a world-class military that ensures both. It doesn't want hegemony. It wants respect. And frankly, doesn't Australia sail near China all the time? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Freedom of navigation cuts both ways, right? Ask critics and you'll get the mirror image. A navy that grows this fast, sails this far, and drills this loud isn't just minding its own business. It's normalizing presence. It's using legal rights to create political facts. And it's testing how much coercion you can pack into a peaceful exercise. Both statements can be true in parts, which is what makes this so hard. A lot of the modern game happens between war and peace, cyber, economic pressure, political influence, elite capture, rumors about rumors, and 1,000 tiny cuts to your confidence. In that gray zone, whoever shows up more wins more. So what does ready look like when you live next to a naval superpower? It looks like layered defense. Fighters, frigates, destroyers, submarines, maritime patrol aircraft, satellites, and the long-range missiles that link them into a single hard-to-kill organism. It looks like alliances that mean something in peacetime and everything on day one. It looks like a Navy chief who says, in effect, hope is not a plan, and a government that starts buying time by buying capability. On the surface fleet, the upgrades are real, combat systems refreshed, magazines deepened, launchers configured for weapons that can sending patrol boats, training police, and, yes, now kitted to punch out sea skimmers and send headaches 1,000 kilometers inland. In practical terms, that means fleet units don't just escort, they deter. But capability is only half the equation. The other half is pace. Australia has to get what it's buying into the water before the strategic window closes. You don't need to win the giant set-piece battle. You'd surge a shipyard. You can't whip up a submarine school in a fortnight. The good news? Australia doesn't have to do it alone. American and Japanese shipyards, British training pipelines, and a web of intelligence links all shorten the lag between decision and deterrent. Laugh if you want, but this is where small jokes save big lives. Because in a crisis, morale matters. Sailors and aircrew fight better when they believe the people behind them have their backs, with spare parts, not slogans. China is signing security deals, embedding officers, and sponsoring development from the Solomons to the Cooks and beyond. Australia is countering with aid, training, diplomatic FaceTime, and real investments in local capacity. One side brings cranes and credit, the other brings clinics, scholarships, and patrol boats. It's not a movie. Nobody gets a heroic montage. It's patience, it's relationships, it's showing up for cyclone season, not just ribbon cuttings. The risk isn't that one handshake flips a country. It's that 10 years of handshakes move the center of gravity a few degrees at a time. That's why this naval lap matters more than the headlines. It wasn't just steel at sea, it was a teaser trailer for a decade that'll be decided in school boards, ports offices, and cabinet committees in towns you can't find on a map. Former officers who've studied China their whole careers will tell you a hard truth. If Australia fought China alone, on its own turf, with the forces it has today, it would struggle. Not because Australian soldiers aren't brave, no one doubts that, but because bravery doesn't reload missiles. China has more ships, more aircraft, more factories, and enough precision weapons to make every runway and port in the north look like a fireworks finale. That doesn't mean defeat is inevitable. It means the opening week would be brutal, and the side that planned better for the boring stuff, fuel, spares, dispersal, redundancy, would decide what comes next. And that brings us back to the circle traced in the sea. A lap around Australia was a map exercise you could film, show the flag, collect the data, watch the reactions. A message sent in steel. Australia's reply can't just be words, it has to be steel of its own, and software and training hours and alliances that pass the Sunday morning phone call test, because there are 1,000 ways to start a conflict. There are only 2 ways it ends. You lose the will to keep fighting, or you run out of the means to do it. Australia's job now is to make sure neither happens first. Once the Chinese task group cleared the Tasman and steamed home, Australia faced the most important part of any encounter, the debrief. What did we learn? Where are our seams? Which parts of our response were elegant and which were duct tape over a leak? The Navy's answer wasn't to throw a press conference. It was to throw itself into exercises that mimic the hard parts of a real crisis. Anti-submarine warfare isn't a trend, it's a survival skill. Every mile of coast you can't see is a mile a hostile submarine can use. That's why the destroyers and frigates have been drilling with P-8s and helicopters like their lives depend on it, because one day they might. It's also why software patches and combat system upgrades are treated like ammunition reloads. In modern war, updates are weapons. And then there's strike. A decade ago, Australian ships were big on air defense, but thin on reach. Today, the plan is different. Think naval strike missiles on the cheeks of your destroyers, land attack cruise missiles cued for long-range theater tasks, and a command and control network that lets a jet, a ship, and a sub share a single firing solution. That's how a small force hits, like a big one. Precision over volume, brains over brawn. No defense chief ever says, "We have plenty." The job is literally to worry, but you can draw some honest lines. Australia can't outbuild China. It can outsmart, out-network, and out-train. It can choose asymmetric investments, long-range missiles that fit on many platforms, sea mines and uncrewed systems that make approaches expensive, hardened bases and rapid runway repair that blunt the first punch, fuel bladders far from obvious targets, dispersed stocks that don't die in a single fireball. None of that is movie trailer stuff. All of it is how small teams beat big ones. On the political front, Australia's message needs to be calm in tone and sharp in content. Freedom of navigation is non-negotiable. Exercises are normal. Intimidation isn't. And the Pacific is a community, not a chessboard. That sounds soft until you add the subtext, we can see you, we can reach you, and we've called our friends. Alliances aren't fairy dust you sprinkle on a problem, they're muscle memory. The US, Japan, the UK, and partners across the region matter because they shrink distance and complicate any adversary's math. If a Chinese task group has to worry that a destroyer it can't see is feeding targeting data to a submarine it can't hear, that group maneuvers differently. If it has to worry that an aircraft it didn't detect just pushed a firing solution to a ship over the horizon, it fights differently. Build that kind of network, and you don't need to match hulls with hulls. You just need the other side to fear ghosts. Go back to the South Pacific. Look at Tonga, the Solomons, Samoa, Fiji, the Cooks, Vanuatu. You'll find Chinese money, Chinese uniforms in advisory roles, and Chinese contractors who can land a project team faster than some countries can draft a memo. None of that means a base tomorrow. It does mean leverage, and leverage turns into access when a crisis comes calling. Australia doesn't need to wring its hands. It needs to hustle. More scholarships, more patrol boats, repair yards, and maritime domain awareness packages that are genuinely useful to island states. Disaster relief that's fast and well-mannered. And yes, keep sending the NRL jerseys and coaches because people remember who showed up after the cyclone, long after they forget who cut the ribbon on the stadium. You're overreacting. It's just ships on the high seas. Sure, and a hurricane is just wind until it hits your roof. Presence is policy. If Australia shrugs at every new normal, the new normal will keep moving. The right answer isn't panic, it's posture. Hardening the north, stockpiling what matters, training until the drills get boring, and then training some more, quietly making sure that if another circumnavigation happens, it yields less data, less surprise, and a lot more uncertainty for the visitors. On the flip side, don't turn every planned movement into Armageddon. The goal is to keep the competition strategic, not emotional. Diplomacy keeps doors open. Military posture keeps the conversation honest. Nobody sane wants to fight over Taiwan or wake up to a blockade challenge in the first island chain, but sane people plan for what lunatics might do. A rough script. Tensions jump in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese forces start rehearsing a lockdown with real teeth, and the Pacific wakes to find maritime traffic inspected more aggressively. In that world, Australia's job is clear. Keep sea lanes open in its approaches, protect critical infrastructure, reassure neighbors, and be ready to contribute to coalition operations with high-value assets that actually change the tactical picture. That means a lot of ugly, practical prep now. Harden the northern ports, disperse fuel, protect undersea cables, and get serious about counter-drone and counter-missile defenses at bases that would find themselves on page 1 of someone else's targeting list. Train the logistics force like it's the front line, because in any long fight it is. China's lap around Australia wasn't a war, it was a warning and a workshop. It said, we can be here, we can practice here, we can normalize this. Australia's answer shouldn't be to mirror every move. It should be to make the next one harder, costlier, and less attractive. Do it with alliances, do it with capability, do it with the kind of steady diplomacy that turns neighbors into friends. And for everyone watching at home, remember that deterrence is a story you tell together. Voters who support smart spending, leaders who don't chase headlines, sailors and aircrew who keep their edge when nobody's watching. That's how you make the next dramatic dawn at sea boring. And boring in geopolitics is victory. Because the game in the Pacific isn't about who can shout the loudest one morning, it's about who still has ships in the water, fuel in the tanks, and friends on the islands when the sun sets.